death of Reverend Jesse Jackson, the civil rights leader, icon, and amongst those things. And then there's Iran, Iraq, Hillary Clinton uh, testifying before Congress, and also former president testifying before Congress, and which is indeed something which is unprecedented. And that's something that we need to be aware of. And then there's the war that's taking place in the Middle East with Iran. Is it a preemptive war? Is it what sort of war is it? A war of choice, as those individuals may say that it is. And of course, we had some special elections which have taken place in Texas. And so, what does that mean for the midterm cycle? What does that mean? Period. And so, there are things here that we need to pay particular attention to. But yes, I want to acknowledge my condolences to the Jackson family, and then we'll also talk about Norman C. Francis, where we are on the campus right now in terms of where we are graced, and right here in the streets named after him, Norman C. Francis Parkway. But yes, Reverend Jesse Jackson. Let's first talk about the impact of this individual's the political and social impact of Reverend Jesse Jackson. Yes.
Yes, Reverend Jackson, in my opinion, uh, was an understudy of Dr. Martin Luther King, who eventually developed his own legacy. He came on the scene as a young man, involved, a young minister with the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, and was uh, mentored by the late Dr. Reverend Martin Luther King. Uh, when Reverend King was assassinated, it sort of left a vacuum in the civil rights movement. And I think to some extent, Reverend Jackson filled that vacuum. That in the sense that he uh, became a major figure, uh, but and to some extent, the challenges that he had at that time were very different from Dr. King in the sense that new organizations and new perspectives about blacks came on the scene with SNCC, CORE, the Black Panther Party, the Nation of Islam. And so, in order to gain some legitimacy, Reverend Jackson had to kind of be accepted, particularly within the Chicago circle, which was very different from the Southern Christian Leadership Circle. And so he was successful and pretty much accepted by many of the new groups who did not necessarily agree with Dr. King, but Jesse presented that more black Afrocentric uh, posture. And so, in terms of Operation Breadbasket, Push for Excellence, those were programs that he had success with. And of course, his major runs in 84 and 88 for the presidency totally transformed the Democratic Party. It made it more inclusive, as opposed to what we saw with Fannie Lou Hammond, the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, which was not seated by Mississippi Democrats. We see Jesse expanding the party, multiracial, multi-inclusive of labor, LGBTQ, disabilities, rural farmers, white rural farmers in Iowa. So he did a major transformation, redefining the Democratic Party to what we know today. And he had fairly good success with the assistance of the late political scientist Ryan Walters, who was his data person, who provided the data that was necessary for him to have the relative success that he had in the various primaries.
Yes, and the fact that you did mention Ron Walters. Ron Walters was my academic advisor at Howard University
Oh, okay.
for my graduate program for the PhD, and I always thank him for his tutelage and during that period of work that he did in helping, should we say, the late great Dr. Ron Walters, and but also Operation Push, and what he coalition. He was one of the individuals, Reverend Jackson, that talked about the value of moving forward and the value of having individuals understand the coalition building. And I want to just say this before we move on to the next topic, and that is the fact that I talked to many individuals, and there's some individuals out there in the professional community who say that they would think that Reverend Jackson would have a greater, is not getting his just due in terms of acclamation in his death. He's being recognized, yes, in South Carolina, recognized in Washington, D.C., and recognized in Chicago and in those areas. But we have to really understand the true significant impact of this person as an individual, as a family man, but his political impact on this country. Yes, sir.
Well, I think definitely people like the ex-president Barack Obama does give him his credit in terms of standing on his shoulders. But I also think I agree with you. That's one of the things that his children are trying to do now, is trying to kind of solidify his legacy.
Right.
So, but I think that you're probably correct. He's not giving, but he's been kind of out of circulation for a while. He was out. So, but in terms of the contributions that he's made, they're very, very significant. Of course, this president would never recognize him and refuse to have the flag fly at half mast. So, that's part of the environment that we're in. But in terms of his legacy, I think that's something that his children are trying to secure.
Absolutely. And let's move on to also Norman C. Francis, Dr. Norman C. Francis, long-term president of Dillard University, the dean of presidents, and his significant impact. And I'd like to, extend our condolences to his family and to Francis' family, and also to the Xavier community. And yes, and I would say that that I know that you have some personal comments as well. Yes, sir.
Well, when I think about the late President Norman Francis, I think about him and the posture of how he was one of the few university presidents to accept house freedom riders on the campus of Xavier University. And, that was a very bold move on his part. He had a very close relationship with the late Rudy Lombard. And of course, the Freedom Riders represent the change from King, because they actually rode across the nation with the effort of desegregating the rail and bus transportation, and met with considerable threats and harm to their lives, and for them to be able for President Francis to be able to accommodate them here shows a major contribution to the civil rights movement. Also, just sitting here where we are now and knowing what Xavier looked like some time ago, I would have to say not only his legacy in terms of academic programs in the health field, but also graduate programs and master's programs, but also in terms of just something that presidents need to follow his model in terms of the university being an anchor for the redevelopment of the Greytown community. And so, we look at what it was yesterday and what it is today, and that speaks highly of the expansion and redevelopment of Xavier. And of course, we can't leave out his overwhelming success in terms of both private and public external funding opportunities. So I think that just like Reverend Jackson, Norman Francis leave for us a legacy of education in the area of education for future leaders in higher education to follow.
Yes, and I agree 100%. And on a personal note, it was President Francis, along with the legendary Al Stokes, that facilitated my return to New Orleans. And I was a professor at Spelman College in Atlanta, and I wanted to come back home to Louisiana, and I came to. Uh, he hired me, and I worked from
Good.
1984 to 1988 in the political science department,
Okay.
and it was outstanding. I remember when he would come in through the door and he welcomed me in, and it was outstanding. And that was a great, and that the department was great. It was one of with Sidney Bartholomew and Al Stokes, and then some of the leaders and some young people from that period have gone on to become judges, Congress people, and elected officials throughout that period. And so I'm very thankful for that. But I do want to talk about
One
yes,
more
yes,
thing
sir.
I want to recognize
Yeah,
that he was, in terms of his completing his law degree at Loyola University, being the first to finish from Loyola University Law School.
absolutely. And that was a great period there. That was a period where uh, political science reigned supreme, and I'm just very thankful for that, to say the least. But I want to talk also about Bill and Hillary Clinton, the testimony that they had uh, before Congress, and it was closed door testimony. And this is something was very unusual. But we know that a precedent very well may have been set. But I want you to talk about the former First Lady and the President of the United States testifying regarding the Epstein files and the Epstein dilemma and problem. And we know that this presents, perhaps for some to say, was a conundrum, and was, in my view of others, that it was indeed a political ploy. But the politics of it may is not over yet. And I know you have a good sense of things. So yes, so
Well, I mean, in my opinion, uh, the idea of forcing them to testify, where especially Hillary, who didn't seem to have little or no involvement with uh, Jeffrey Epstein, but even Bill, who's seen in different pictures and different shots, basically came in, said they had nothing to really to contribute, particularly with the accusations of the pedophile kinds of things and the rings and stuff. And so I think they did an excellent job of basically showing that the whole thing was political. The person who's most mentioned in most pictures is President Donald Trump, and for the committee to force them to come in and and then not wanting it to be public, sort of lends itself to the idea that maybe it was just political and they had something that they didn't want the public to see. But I think they both did an excellent job, although it was unprecedented to treat a president and a first lady, ex-president, ex-first lady, the way they were treated.
and it's again, I agree with you 100%. And so it's going to have a significant impact. And let's see how this plays out in the not only in the short term but in the long run. The immediate thing which is taking place right now, which is affecting all of us in the United States and in the country in the world, is this global crisis that we have in the Middle East, and the war in the Middle East. With now, where you see with President Trump and his administration, they went from changing. They went have gone into the Middle East, and have indeed engaged in a proactive, preemptive, a first strike, and assassinated a leader, taking a leader out of a country, and now the repercussions of Israel and the United States working hand in hand. And I say the United States doing it because they're coupled. Even though it was Israel at the behest of the United States, they're still coupled together. And the ramifications of this can have a very, very big ripple effect. We know it's geopolitics, yes, but the geopolitics is going to have it will have indeed a dangerous effect on the people of the world, and in particular those of us in the United States, and at some point here in Louisiana. Yes, sir.
Well, let me just say that when you say geopolitics, uh, it's all about oil. If you look at the two countries that uh, President Trump has attacked, it's Venezuela, an oil rich country, and then the Middle East with Iran, which causes to some extent a disruption in the oil, which may be intended. It, it could be viewed as something that may work to the advantage of the United States when those two areas are disrupted and to a large extent. I don't particularly buy any of the arguments. First and foremost, constitutionally, the right to declare war is a power of the Congress. And so, but we know since World War II, roughly 88%, 90% of the conflicts that we've been in were initiated by the executive branch. So that has become, but the caveat for that is that if there is a quote unquote imminent threat, I don't buy that Iran was an imminent threat. I don't buy that the negotiations, time we heard that the negotiations were going well, and all of a sudden the negotiations were not doing well.
And then there's the War Powers Act as well.
Yeah.
Yes.
But I don't buy that that we found out that Iran was going to attack us. I just don't buy those arguments.
Say that was preemptive.
Preempted. I don't buy any of those arguments. I think the game plan, particularly renaming the Department of Defense the Department of War, which it used to be, is to demonstrate exactly what it did. I think that was the plan. The plan was to throw everyone off guard with the negotiation and throw everyone off guard with these various assertions, and to do exactly what we did.
Well, the argument, if I can interrupt you, the argument and presentation that was given is that going back to the Bush doctrine, the Bush had a doctrine of preemptive strikes, and so yes, we're going to strike you first before you strike us. So we see then now that they're striking this country first, but there are those who would say that the administration is saying that they were not engaging in good faith negotiations, meaning Iran, and Iran is saying the United States was not engaging in good faith administration. And what do you say to that?
Well, I mean, going back to Bush,
yes.
I will say this on Bush's behalf. 9/11 occurred.
Okay.
Now, prior to 9/11, Bush was very, very unpopular, George W. Bush, but after 9/11, there was a different sentiment about war. But in this particular case, once again, there was no imminent
So this was
threat.
a war of choice.
A war of choice,
as opposed as to a just war. And I want our listeners to understand that there are two fundamentally different things between a just war and a war of choice. Yes, sir.
Exactly. And as you say, the idea of the War Powers Act is to have the ability to rein in the executive branch in terms of using its power as commander-in-chief, which is to protect the citizens and the United States from imminent threats in homes, which sometimes don't allow us time to go through Congress. This was not the case. And this was a war of choice, and it's more a choice of global interests and reframing the global cards with respect to oil.
Okay, before we move into another conversation, 4 days in, 4 weeks out. How do you see this manipulated, and how do you see this flow at this point of the Middle East?
Well, we don't know.
Flow.
One thing we know
about
the easiest part is attacking and going to war. But one thing we've learned from every conflict we've been in, from Iraq, Afghanistan, we've learned that we have no control over the aftermath of our attacks.
Okay, well, I'm glad you
said. So, he's saying 4 weeks. I say, not necessarily the case. I think it really places Americans in a very vulnerable position in terms of abroad. And we already see people who are in places like Dubai, Americans who are doing business over there, they're already under a threat. And I think, uh, it's the guerrilla side of of the warfare and, the terrorism aspects that I'm not sure how to predict those things.
Well, I can give us some predictions at this point before we move the conversation. And this administration has already said that they do not buy the argument that's given by uh, the late General Colin Powell that if you break it, you own it. They say if it's broken, it's broken. And my uh, response to that is, and that's why individuals hate Americans,
Yeah.
because you go in there, you break it, and then if you rise up, you rise up. If you don't rise up, so be it. We've done our part, or we've done all that we intend to do, and that's been historically the nature of Americans
Exactly.
in terms of foreign policy. And when they do own it, they intend to truly own it.
Right. But we're
Yes, sir.
back to the ugly American again.
Yes,
And so,
100%.
and I think many of the other countries who would not have chosen this route are coming on board because they understand the economic impact on oil and by disrupting the flow of oil in the Straits of Hormuz and like.
Now,
So,
if we can turn the conversation in the remaining 7 minutes or so that we do have, uh, let's talk about some state and local some state and local politics, and but state politics on a national level, in the sense that we see that in Texas, we see that there is the Democrats have already have their nominee, and the Republicans are going for their nominee for the U.S. Senate, and the Republicans are now going into a runoff of their nominee for the U.S. Senate. And Jasmine Crockett fought a gallant battle, but there's an up and coming new individuals that's coming in the Democratic Party that's coming into the fray. That the belief is that he is now the new Texas hope.
yeah.
Yes, sir.
Well, and I think they were both good candidates.
Okay.
I think that look, I kind of figured that she make would not win the election outright. But now I think it's the time for, if there's a hope for the Democrats in the Senate, they were going to have to. It would be smart for them to unite, but in the runoff. Uh, a lot of it, I understand, depends on who's in the runoff. I understand who wins the runoff of the Republican primary, and of
The
course,
incumbent
many believe that
or versus.
Paxson, yeah, Cornyn or Paxson, and Paxson, of course, has had a lot of different scandals and many different things that he was involved in, and many believe that if he is the Republican nominee, then the Democratic candidate will have a better chance to win. But clearly, uh, hats off to Representative Crockett for making a valiant run. But the people have spoken, and it's now for them to unite. Because at the end of the day, it's about who controls the House and who controls the Senate. And so I think that uniting in the runoff, the Democratic candidates uniting in the runoff would have a better chance. But clearly, if Paxson, who was shown as leading in the polls, will be the candidate for the Republican side, then the Democratic candidate would have a better
And
chance.
moving forward, then, if you were to have a Democratic controlled House of Representatives after the midterm elections, what would that say to you in terms of the politics of in Washington D.C. between executive and legislative branch?
Well, clearly, you're talking about what we call divided government.
Okay.
Now it's one thing when you have unified government, that is both houses of Congress, the presidency, and in this case, the Supreme Court, are all Republicans, even though the courts don't identify themselves as Republicans, but they're clearly conservative, and they're clearly most of the nominees have been appointed by conservatives. So, but this would be a game changer. In fact, if the House would, because that means that the president would not be able to have everything he wants to sail through the Congress, and will be in a posture to negotiate, would have to negotiate with a Democratic House. If both chambers became Democratic, it would be even more challenging. And I think we've seen a pattern where Democrats have done well both in state houses and state races and in national elections.
Yes, and now let's me turn the conversation again to some local matters. Now we're looking at the legislature comes into session, and what do you anticipate with this new legislative session? I know there are a host of bills which are being introduced. I know one bill in particular is about they say that maybe introduced to allow individuals to carry firearms on campus.
Yeah, well,
yes, okay.
well, I hadn't heard about that.
That's
Well, clearly,
yes, sir. That's real.
one that would be really bad.
Okay, okay,
In my opinion. But
okay.
but the two that I talk about, we've talked about insurance, and nothing still needs to be done. And the second is AI.
Yeah.
Whether AI is going to be harmful.
I want to thank you for joining me. It's outstanding. It's always great when you come in. We talk some real politics, and I also want to thank my listeners and viewers for tuning in. And this is Dr. Clark's One-on-One, the Living Classroom. You can follow me on all platforms of social media, and we'll see my guests again one month from today.
Very
And
good.
again, this is Dr. Clark's Living Classroom. And as always, it's been a pleasure.